We welcome Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Prady to Live Talks Los Angeles. They discuss Neil's book, Starry Messenger, Cosmic Perspectives on Civilization. Bill previously interviewed Bill Nye for us, and that video is in our YouTube channel. Neil is an astrophysicist and the author of the New York Times bestselling Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, among other books. He is the director of the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History, where he has served since 1996. He is the host and co-founder of the Emmy-nominated popular podcast StarTalk. Bill is a television writer and producer. He co-created the hit series The Big Bang Theory and served as executive producer of that series until its finale in May of 2019. For his work with NASA, a storyline on Big Bang promoting space exploration, he was awarded the agency's Exceptional Public Achievement Medal, NASA's third highest civilian honor. Towards the end, I will pose some questions sent in from you in the audience. Welcome to all watching, and take it from here, Bill.
Thank you very much, Ted. Neil, it's just terrific to be with you this morning or this afternoon or whatever time of day people are streaming this. You and I met, I think, in one of the most wonderful ways. We asked you if you would come on The Big Bang Theory and be insulted by Sheldon Cooper, and you said yes.
It remains some of the funnest things I've ever done. Appearing twice on The Big Bang Theory, I think in season 3 and then in the final season. But if you watch me in my little bit in season 3, it is very clear that I'm not an actor. And then years went by and I never got a phone call again. And I said, okay, I couldn't hide from them that I'm not an actor. But I since then I've done 2 Cosmoses, and there's a lot of sort of screen time, that I had to work on and develop. And so I think I was better in that final season.
I will respectfully disagree, and the evidence is available streaming on HBO Max if anyone wants to check it out. But let's get to this terrific new book, which I have to say I enjoyed. And as we get into the meat of the thing, I will say that one of the things I enjoyed about this book is that you calmly discuss things I often rant about, having to do with how we look at the world and whether we look at the world through a scientific perspective. This book is different than other books that you have written, in that it seems to me it reaches out beyond science to issues of culture and politics to a certain extent. Do you think this book is different than other books you've written?
Well, so yeah, the topics are very different. Yes. The topics are topics we all care about, topics we've all argued over the Thanksgiving table about. There's a chapter in there called Meat Eaters and Vegetarians, because, and I address let me give more titles so we get a sense of it. There's a title, Gender and Identity, a title, Color and Race. Yeah, I went there, Color and Race. There's a title, a chapter title, Risk and Reward, Truth and Beauty, Life and Death. And so what is going on? What's going on is those topics that we so often dig our heels in and then fight each other, argue with each other, they look different if you are a scientist invoking the lens of science. And I think people, after a few moments of research on the internet, after they search for what might be an odd idea they have, and they find verification of their odd idea by a half a dozen other people that have the same odd idea, this feeds an opinion, a foundation of a worldview that in many cases is just misdirected, delusional, or simply false. And so this book is a gentle journey through all the things that we've argued about, that and it's an offering of a perspective. First, a scientific perspective, if you want to know what you're arguing about looks like to a scientist, but then I add another notch to it, which is a cosmic perspective. And that elevates everybody And you're there arguing and say, well, wait a minute, there's another point of view. No, it's not in the middle where you have to compromise. It's another vista that you ascend to and look back at what you were arguing about and say, I wasn't arguing about anything. Upon realizing this, for having had that perspective. And I will add, you began your intro here by saying, let's get to the meat of the problem. And I thought, in the vegetarian meat eaters chapter, do vegetarians say, let's get to the meat of the problem? I'm thinking not. So part of the interesting dialogue and what you feed people and how they argue and why. So this book may have more science in it than any other book I've ever written, simply because every turn of paragraph is what a new subject looks like through the lens of science. And so science applied to civilization.
At what point do you think you observed that people sort of fall into two categories, those who look at the world through a scientific lens and those who don't?
The book has been gestating within me ever since I was scientifically literate. And that was early middle school. I was thinking about it in elementary school, my first visit to a planetarium, my local planetarium, the Hayden Planetarium, where I now serve as director. But that was my first encounter with interesting science that I was starstruck by it. Right? Sometimes I think the universe chose me rather than it being I who chose it. But I'm there, and I start learning about science and math, and I used to do brain teaser puzzles, this sort of thing, which are intended to trick you, but you have to look to see where is the trick and why, and how do you solve it. And I remembered that's how old I am, in 1973, it was. There's a comet that was coming around. It's called Comet Kohoutek. If you're old enough, you might remember that comet. It was highly touted because it was discovered very far out in the solar system. If you discover a comet far out, it's going to get even brighter, and then it's going to be blazing in the skies, and it was going to come around the Christmas holidays. So it was billed as the Christmas comet. So there was a lot of hype for it that it didn't live up to, for interesting reasons, by the way. But I knew about this comet. I gave talks about this comet. Okay, in middle school, that's how much astronomy I knew at the time. It was enough to actually give talks. And I saw someone in the street, an adult, a full human being adult, carrying a sign saying, "Repent, the comet is coming, the end of the world is near." And I said, "Really? What? Where do you come? What? Wait, what? You're a grown up here, all right? Do you know how to think? Do you understand what a comet is?" By the way, the guy didn't even know the comet was coming because it wasn't visible yet in the night sky. He only learned about it because we told him. Okay, so I said, "Wow, there are people who don't understand science, which itself is not a problem until that ignorance flows into your behavior in a way that is either not in your best interest, or you might rise to power and have control over laws or legislation that would then affect us all." And I think to myself, these are the seeds of the unraveling of an informed democracy if people start spreading misinformation in this way. And the internet has only magnified this, of course. So that's when it began. So it was my whole life. This book has been gestating within me my entire life, a lifetime of these observations.
Well, especially given that, one of the things that I marveled at as I read this book is that the frustrations that I have, being a person who I think looks at the world through a fairly rational scientific lens, the way I find myself expressing those things to people is less calm and measured than. And as I was reading the book, there are many times I got to the end of a paragraph and said, he really should have added the words "you idiot" here. How is it that the director of the Hayden Planetarium walks through the world and sees people just holding on to some fairly astonishing ideas? How do you keep yourself from grabbing people by the shoulders, shaking them, and saying, "Listen to me"?
Okay, as an educator,
Sure.
that we have a higher calling here than just calling people idiots, right? There's some duty in the world that any, I think, good educator has to work with whatever is misunderstood. You know, there's an interesting fact that if early enough in school, the people don't know enough to really misunderstand anything because they're learning things for fresh. This is the, you know, this is Asia, this is Europe, this is Africa, this happens that way. And you didn't have any prior notion typically. It's when you're an adult and you have prior notions that you get what you would think conflicts with your personal philosophies that could come to you from a lot of different places. Could be your religion, could be your culture, it could be your community, it could be some organization you're a part of, even dare I say a cult, and you have some way that you think the world works. And in a pluralistic land such as the United States, in one where we believe we have freedom of speech, no one is going to take that from you. If Jesus is your savior, that is constitutionally protected ideas and thoughts, no question about it. But when you have a personal truth, and I get to this in the chapter Truth and Beauty, when you have a personal truth, which no one can or should take from you, you have to have some act of persuasion and, in the limit, threat of violence to convince someone else of your personal truth. This is how you get religious wars. Each religion is certain that they have the unerring truth. But what they don't realize is that they're personal truths. The methods and tools of science are exquisitely tuned to establish what I'll call objective truths. These are things that are true about the world, whether or not you believe in them. And the school system doesn't teach science that way. It just says, here's some facts, da-di-da-di-da-di-da-da, but it doesn't really explore how we come to have confidence in what we say. What does it mean when when facts become data, data becomes information, information becomes knowledge, and knowledge becomes wisdom? All right. This is an arc that science has worked so hard to perfect. And if that were taught in school, I think as adults, if someone says, I think the earth is flat, and I say, well, here's a photo of Earth from space, and here's why we think it. Here's, by the way, on the East Coast, if you watch a ball game that takes place on the West Coast and it's live, it's a late afternoon game, dark for you, and the sun is still shining in California. Have you ever thought about how that should work? So as an educator, I'm obligated to unpack what you believe and try to work with you to get you to see what the difference is between the objective truths and these other things that you think are true. That's a duty that we all have. And you don't have to have that duty. You can say, you idiot, you can do that.
You idiot. It keeps me from being invited to parties. But I do, there in what you just said is one of my absolute favorite things about the book, which is what ought to be an inarguable, immediately accepted concept, but frustratingly isn't. And that is the very basic concept: some things are true. And that, you know, science moves always from a place of observation with the goal of finding out what's true. What's true? I've observed this. What is the truth of this? And there seems to be some sort of cultural predisposition that we have, or perhaps we've gained in the past few decades, to move away from the concept that some things fall into a bucket of true. What do you is that a thing that you see? And if so, what do you think might be the genesis of that?
Yeah, so I would, so that's why I have my qualifier before the word. I say there are things that are objectively true. Objectively means you can all go around the table and look at the evidence and arrive at the same conclusion from that evidence. And that's what objective truths are. They're truths established by observation, experiment, repeated experiment. So if you're the lone person who gets a result and no one else's results agree with yours, that's not evidence that you're right. That's evidence that you are very likely wrong. But you know what's interesting? And I was just gelling this in my head in recent weeks. If someone, it was based on some TikTok ads, right? There's one with a neck pillow that you say, we've been doing it all wrong. And they rotate the pillow 180 degrees. And I'm saying, okay, why do we so love it when somebody says, everybody's been doing it wrong? Here's the right way. And then you just believe that. We somehow have this soft spot for the underdog who is saying they're right and everybody else is wrong. And just because everyone else disagrees with you, it doesn't mean you're correct. You can't use that as evidence that you're correct. And the neck pillow thing, whoever's seen that ad, I don't know, but I've seen it enough times, I'm thinking everybody's seen it. Depending on where the split is in the pillow, okay, if you're sitting down and you're sleeping and you don't want your chin to hit, you flip the pillow around. I thought that was obvious, actually. But if you want your head to lean back, you put the cushion there with the opening in the front. I didn't think this was so deep that it required a TikTok revelation for people to think that everybody's been doing it wrong, but this one dude who's showing it is correct. So it's a calm analysis. Even though I'm getting sort of riled up here, the book is a calm analysis of what does it mean when someone is telling you something that you think is true or they think is true, and that they sound compelling, they sound honest, and then you just are absorbed by it. In the chapter on risk and reward, I pose the question: is it that our brains simply are ill-equipped to think naturally about probability and statistics? Because I think that's the case. You know why? Because I can tell you that every number on a roulette table has an equal probability of coming up. But you'll see people at roulette tables betting on 7 or whatever number, right? And it's saying, oh, it's due, because they look at the list of previous numbers and it hasn't shown up yet. This is due. And no, it's not. Okay, it's not due. All right. And then I looked at this again. I'm an educator, so I can't hit him on the head. I got to look back behind him and I say, oh my gosh, the school curriculum does not teach probability and statistics. It's not there. It's an elective, maybe your junior, senior year of high school. And of course it's in college, but not in the fundamentals. And that could be the most important thing that's taught. So when I say 97%, it's now higher in the last 20 years, of scientists, climate scientists, tell you humans are warming Earth and we need to reduce your carbon footprint if you don't want that to get worse. And you're going to say, well, I found this one scientist who says the opposite, and that happens to align with your political philosophies, so you clutch onto it and bring them forward. That's not how science works. Just because they're the one doesn't mean they're right. This is the thing. The numbers of that really matters.
Well, I was going to say, you have a terrific example in the book where you take the climate change problem with 97% of scientists in agreement, which for a lot of people is far in the future, and you do a wonderful thing of bringing it into the immediate present.
Yeah, that helps. If you put an abstract statistic of the near decades into the now, I'd like to think it helps you. So, for example, they just finished a bridge across the ravine, okay? Let's say it's a suspension bridge, which has some extra physics necessary that you have to get right. And 97% of engineers say, this design is flawed. If you drive your truck across it, you will die on that first crossing. And then 3% of the engineers say, no, it's just fine. They don't know what they're talking about, but we do. Would you? No, I'm not taking the bridge, okay? Because I know how science works. They didn't just caucus and decide to agree with each other. If you think scientists just love agreeing with each other, you've never been to a science conference, right? We will disagree with each other for the smallest reasons, okay? But when something is compelling, when enough observations and data and statistical analysis support a result, then we say, yep, that's it. We all shake hands, we go to have a beer, and we start working on the next problem. If you're the kind of person who would take the bridge because 3% of the engineers say it's perfectly safe and 97% say you'll die, then you're the kind of person who would then say, I don't believe humans are warming the earth. But I'd like to think that that example shifts your perspective. This is what the book is about, shifting your perspective so that you can see something you dug your heels in a whole new light.
You know, I can, when we look at the guy in the casino who's excited about, you know, the number hitting because the numbers do, and you know, to try to figure out how he comes to be that way. There are two things that you bring up in your book that I think, you know, where I think you're offering an explanation. One is that he wasn't educated on how statistics work. But the second is you do also talk about human beings recognizing patterns and that skill being perhaps overdeveloped in human beings.
Interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. That's interesting.
Well,
yes.
I mean, you bring up the example of somebody running into somebody that they know, and drawing the conclusion that it's a very small world, based on that datum.
Right. So it's a coincidence, and there are people who do walk among us who say there's no such thing as coincidences. There's a reason for everything. That's the kind of thing you would say if you never took classes in probability and statistics. So you see someone you hadn't seen in a million years, you thought about them maybe the day before, and you see them walking in the streets in a foreign city. And you say, oh, what a small world. So here's what you do next time. Go up to every single person in the street that you walk past. Stop them and say, do I know you? And they'll say, no. Say, big world. Just do that. And you will do that millions of times. All right. And you will be cured of the urge to say small world, or there's no such thing as coincidences. This is ordained, preordained. And by the way, we are so diabolical as a species that there are people who know how bad we are at probability and statistics. They know it so well that they created entire industries to exploit that failure of our thinking. And these are the people who make casinos. The entire city of Las Vegas exists because of this shortcoming of our thinking. And I think I tell the story in the book. One of my earlier books, I think the book on Pluto, when Pluto was demoted justifiably. I had a book on Pluto.
And noted as such on the Big Bang Theory.
On the Big Bang Theory, Sheldon got upset with me for having a hand in the demotion of Pluto. So anyway, I arrived at the McCarran Airport at Las Vegas, and it was like a couple of months after it had published. So I did the vain author thing. You go into the bookstore. Back then, Borders Books was still alive. And I said I would look for the book just to see if it's there. And by the way, it's a large enough bookstore, so they had sections. And so I looked, and I said, I went up to the front desk and said, excuse me, do you have a science section? And they said, oh, no, sorry. No, I said, where do you keep your science books? And they said, oh, we don't have a science section. And in that moment, I thought to myself, oh, you wouldn't want any critical thinking to go on before you gamble in Las Vegas. So of course they're not going to hand you a science section. Duh. And I tweeted that. And that was the first of what became unlimited tweets to follow about thoughts I had in my encounters with everyday life. And this book actually features half a dozen or so tweets that capture these various moments. And so I'm upset with us as a species that we would exploit it this way. And remember, ask yourself, where does revenue from state lotteries go to typically?
Well,
do you know?
Claim is to education.
Education. Okay. So So if they did it right, they would use the money to teach people probability and statistics. But if they did that, then no one would go gamble. And then you would lose the source of revenue. So it's a self-limiting arrangement that exists there. You'll keep the casino industry going as long as you do not teach people what's going on at the roulette table.
Well, actually, although you in the book make a comment about spending time gambling, and it echoed my own experience, where you say, you spend a period of time, you describe a period of time and an investment of $300, and you walk away and you say, well, I had a $300 entertainment experience. It was worth that to me. And then you note in the book, nobody ever asks after a bad Broadway play, how much did you lose?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I try to do.
Well, I would argue, Neil, that people who walked out of the Princess Diana musical recently in New York City came out saying, I think we really lost tonight.
So what I try to do is show some authentic compassion for people who are caught up in whatever is the zany, delusional perspectives that have consumed them. So there I am railing on the person betting on 7 because it's due. What I say is, by the way, I enjoy the floor of casinos. In the old days, the machines made their noise. They've all been tamped down now. But the dinging and someone gets a jackpot and it rings extra, so that it's a carnival atmosphere in a way. And so I like the roulette table simply because it's pure. All right, no one is, it's very pure probabilities, and I usually bet on prime numbers just because why not? I said, if I'm going to go down, let it be because I'm doing something authentically mathematical. And there are a lot of prime numbers between 2 and 31 on the wheel. My point is, I'll bring in a fixed amount of money. Like I said, it's a few hundred, $300 typically. And I'll portion it so that I'm there for a couple of hours. All right. $5 here, and you win every now and then, it recovers it. And so my simple point is, if I spend the 300, then I walk away and I say, that was my entertainment for the night. It was $300. And in New York City, you can drop $300, dinner for 2, bottle of wine, theater, and drinks, whatever. That's $300. And you don't say, oh, I lost $300 last night because I went to the opera. No, that's your entertainment. So I don't want to remove the joy people get from gambling with the occasional win. I just want you to, if you do that with full knowledge that the number 7 is never due. Okay, that's all.
Well, as you know, I will say to people, I will play craps on a casino floor because the house has the lowest edge at a craps table in the casino, and I will say, well, this is a diminishing sine wave approaching asymptotically the casino's edge, which is a loss rate. I can calculate it based on the number of hands I play per hour, and that's the cost of entertainment, to stand with crazy people and watch.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yes.
Here's,
and by the way, I'm never there long enough for them to bring me a free drink. Because if you are winning, the casino says, "Oh, we got to do something about this." Okay, so let's, the interior alarms go off, and they say, "Send a drink to take to the person."
That's right, and they get upset when you offer a Coke because it may sharpen your acuity. That it's kind of a, and I think that there's a generosity to your approach in the book. This example.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That's the educator in me, the compassionate educator. Thank you for noticing that.
This is a good example of that, which is and a lesson that I can draw from, which is, it's not necessary to walk up to somebody and say, well, listen, if you're going to lose money, I'm going to move you from this game to that game where you'll lose less. But at the same time, and I was really interested, you a moment ago said, when we were talking, you talked about race and you said, yes, I went there. One of the things that happened, and has happened for quite some time, in the discussion of race, has been the misapplication of science. And so the same scientific illiteracy that allows a man to stand at a roulette wheel and wait for a 7 he thinks is coming also permits somebody to claim scientific authority. And in a discussion of something where science doesn't apply in the way they claim. And you talk about that in a chapter about race. And I was fascinated. And my first question, to you is, did you hesitate going there, as you say in the book?
No, I'd accumulated enough sort of, dare I call them, fun observations where you can look at it and say, hey, that's pretty funny that we used to think that, or that we do think that, or that's sad that we did. I'm glad that we're not doing that anymore. Oh my gosh, we are doing it, but in a different way, right? So it opens up that box that occasionally gets nailed shut temporarily until some tragic event happens, George Floyd among them. And so a point I try to get across there is that not all sciences are equally resistant to bias. And probably the highest risk science to bias is anthropology, because it's a comparison
study of himself.
Anthropology, where because it's fundamentally a comparison and observations of cultures. And if you look at 19th century anthropologists, by far the most racist community of scientists ever assembled, right? 19th century going up through sort of the eugenics period, up through the 1930s, which we don't admit to because the eugenics movement was very big here in America. What we don't admit to is that helped to feed 1930s rise of Hitler's ideas about the superiority of the Aryan race. And so we want to sort of distance ourselves from that, but they're correlated in a very important cause and effect correlated. So
that's covered, by the way, the new Ken Burns piece on the Holocaust points.
Oh, okay, excellent. So because if you look at other views of Hitler, it makes it seem like it's just all within him. And as far as he was concerned, he was following the science. All right, there it was. So when you have results that come from a field that are that susceptible, you need to be very careful on the path between whatever the scientific result is and whether that, if it ever becomes policy or legislation affecting nations, affecting governments, parliament, Congress. And so what I did was it was predicated, if you read, I have a lot of that literature, books from that era, you read the literature and it's all about trying to, post-Darwin, it's all about trying to show that Black people were just less evolved than white people, and Black people are closer to monkeys or chimps than white people. And they list all of these things, and they talk about the curly hair, and they talk about the dark skin, and on the chimp, and I thought about it, and I said, did they really think this through? Really? Did they really? And so one of the proudest things I have in the book is this rant. It's a fun rant, but it's a rant nonetheless. Goes 2 pages on what if 19th century anthropologists were Black racists instead of white racists.
You do a wonderful description of comparing white people to, in this way.
Yeah, so what kind of things might they come up with to say white people are much closer to chimpanzees than Black people? And you got to I'll give you a taste of the list, but in there are things like, but have you ever heard or read about a lice outbreak among Black people? No, you haven't. Okay, Black people are 10 times less likely to get lice in their hair than white people. And chimps, when they're pruning each other, what are they doing? They're pulling lice out of each other's hair and eating it, okay? They know they have lice. White people have lice. Black people don't. Also, for most chimps, yes, they have dark faces and hands, but if you part the hair on their bodies, their skin is white. It's pure white. But they're not looking at this. The white anthropologists did not think about this or see this. And here's a point made by, it was Stephen Jay Gould in his book, The Mismeasure of Man, which really blew this open. This is back from the 70s, early 80s. He was visiting the British Museum, where they have a lot of weird artifacts. And on one shelf, there's Broca's brain. Broca was a brilliant scientist of his day. And when he died, they kept his brain. And around the corner from that, they have the penis of a Black African. That's all you need to know about the mindset of the colonist scientists who did this, okay? It's not the brain of the Black African. It's not the penis of Broca. This is how they even approached it. And if you look at Africa, the genetic diversity of Africa is huge. That's where the species began. And if all you do is go to Africa and say, oh, everybody has dark skin, so they are one category, when you could look closer. By the way, if you have the greatest diversity, that means you would have the shortest people. To look around Africa, sure enough, the shortest people in the world are in Africa, tribally, all right? They would have some of the tallest people. Sure enough, they're there, the Pygmies and the Watusis, okay? What else might you have? If you look for the slowest people in the world, okay, physically slowest, well, there are no contests for that, but you'll probably find them in Africa. How about the fastest people? They'll probably be in Africa too. Oh my gosh, we do have contests for that. And African descendants have dominated the sprints and the distance things ever since we had such contests. So were the Europeans looking into Africa to find people smarter than they were? No, that was not their objective. They didn't even think to do that. And chances are, had they done it, they would have found such people. And by the way, last I checked, Egypt is in Africa. All right. And there you have architecture, towering architecture, far greater than anything Europe was doing at the time. Europe was still disemboweling heretics or whatever, long after this culture arose. And it's in Africa. And so I don't know. So there's a rant there. And I end the rant, just to give you a little taste, where you have, again, it's a stupid rant. It's a racist rant of racist Black anthropologists that don't exist, okay? So it's how you might create these arguments. So one of them, I put it out there and I say, when Black children drive by trees, none of them ever think to themselves, gee, I want to live in that tree. This is not a thought, okay? But a new white family with kids, they say, oh, a tree, let's build a tree house and move into the tree. And so the Black anthropologists would say, here's evidence they're trying to get back to their ape roots because they must return to the trees. So as absurd as all that sounds, other than being true, it's as absurd as it all sounded on the other side. And so that chapter is an exploration of people's biases and how it can distort what you think is true and what is not.
Well, but if you look at all of the, there's a common thread running through the book, and I think it connects so clearly with your explanation of the genesis of the book, of the long gestating genesis of the book, which is the frustration, which again, I'm going to say you expressed with restraint, but the frustration isn't with the specific issues. It isn't with the matter of climate science or the casino or the misuse of science to justify racism, all of that. It seems to be with a lack of ability to look at the world through a scientific lens, because
thank you. That's a common threat. Thank you for noticing that, because it's not just here's an argument here, learn that, and let's move to the next argument. There is this underlying landscape on which all of this is told. And thank you for noticing that, because it's there. It's a persistent foundation on which these ways of looking at the world emerge. And so, and there's a commonality to it, right? Once you know how to be an authentic skeptic and how you think about a problem and ask questions, and you know what's objectively real, you put all that together and you can move through life applying it in so many different interesting ways, enriching your life, I think, because objective truths, like I said, the good thing about them is that they're true whether or not you believe in them. And ultimately, nature is the judge, jury, and executioner of your ideas.
One of the things you talk about as an objective truth, and it's fascinating, is the objective beauty of a sunset. And you place, there are objective truths like the number of hydrogen atoms in a water molecule, and no one's going to argue that one. But you place the
number's 2, by the way. H2O. See, you missed an educational moment there. You can't just say that and not give the answer.
They're bonded to one oxygen atom.
Yes, they are.
But by placing the concept, a sunset is beautiful, as you move it into a more objective truth category, and you talk about, you have an entire chapter talking about beauty, essentially, of how do you reconcile what seems to be a poetic concept, the beauty of a sunset, with your objective scientific lens, if you will, that you look at the world through?
Yeah, very important question there. And that chapter, Truth and Beauty, the truth goes through how scientists establish what is objectively true, but beauty is always sort of paired with it. So I felt obligated to say something about beauty. And I argued not to make a perfect logical conclusion that you must agree with, but I think I made a strong case for certain things in nature, natural things that we pretty much all would agree are beautiful. And for example, I cite sunsets. Who doesn't want to just stop and pause and peer at a sunset, especially if they're nicely positioned clouds and you see beams of sunlight coming up? Those are the pictures that make it into Bible posters that have, quotes, deep philosophical, biblical quotes that are lessons for life or wisdom. They don't put photos of the underbelly of a tarantula and then add these same quote. So there's a whole category of nature that we don't generally agree is beautiful, unless you're an arachnologist or something. So maybe spiders are the most beautiful thing to you. So I collected things that are just true things in nature that they're kind of beautiful. The fact that pi even exists as a number. If you take a circle and measure the circumference of the circle, and then measure the diameter, divide those two numbers, you get pi. And you know something? You get pi no matter how big the circle is. This is beautiful. This is extraordinary. This is. Oh, and by the way, just since we're there, do you know your hat size? The size of your head? Do you know your hat size?
I do know my hat size. It's 7.
What is it?
My hat size is 7 5/8.
Okay, so that hat size that's the circumference of your head in inches divided by pi.
Mm-hmm.
You can go try that.
Okay.
Of course, you need a tape measure for that. But
okay.
Everyone and listeners at home, yes, do try this at home. If you want to know your hat size, measure where the brim of the hat would go around your head in inches and divide by pi. 3.14 would be fine for this, and you get your hat size. So, but the point is, I give a list of suggestions that are sort of objectively beautiful because they're true. And, well, not only because they're true, but because we have evidence of their repeated reference in our cultures for what is another example. There's something almost sacred about mountaintops. Okay. What is it about mountaintop? We even go to the Bible. You know, the Noah's Ark was on a mountaintop. Okay. Was it Mount Ararat, I think? Moses gets the 10 Commandments, not from a valley, but from a mountaintop, Mount Sinai. Jesus spoke from as a Sermon on the Mount. Okay. It wasn't even down in an amphitheater where the acoustics might have been better. Okay. It was on the Mount. Where are the gods of ancient Greece? Mount Olympus. Okay. Where's any other god we place? Up in the clouds, high up above. And so there's certain places that recur in our cultures that we think of as beautiful or even divine on a level where we insert our deities to occupy them. And what's below your feet, it's like the devil is below your feet if you're Christian. I don't know what Jews think are below your feet, but the Christians think devil is down in whatever direction that is.
Well, Jews think a damp basement is below your feet.
And by the way, animists who think neither specifically of a heaven or a hell think more animists are typically, it's common among indigenous cultures. So in Australia, natives of North and South America, they will think more of spirit energy of the brook or the tree, of the wind, of a mountain. And so to them, nature manifests more as divinity rather than some invented entity, typically. And so but notice that the nature that's referenced this way are beautiful aspects of nature. Like I said, the brook, the waterfall, and so anyhow, so I go there just to balance out truth but because it's a paired set of words. And who's the famous writer who said, truth is beauty, beauty, truth, that is all.
You have actually, in one of my favorite things in your chapter on Earth and Moon is you have a quote from our mutual friend astronaut Mike Massimino talking about his view when he spacewalked, and his initial thought that this might be the view from heaven, and then his realization, no, this is what heaven must look like. That
looking down on Earth, right? Looking at Earth. And he wells up with that remembrance. Oh, by the way, you had him on like 20 episodes or something of the Big Bang. He was like a regular, right?
Mike was on Big Bang a lot. He's a terrific guy. He's also the guy who repaired the Hubble telescope.
One of several, yes. He was he gets to put that on his business card, right?
Well, it's pretty. There's a terrific documentary about that, which I
repair telescopes in space. Deal with it. So the point is, when you ascend, things look different to you. Some details go away, but other larger truths come into view. And there you are above the Earth from his perch, 360 miles up, repairing the Hubble telescope. And yes, he reflected, am I in heaven? No, I'm looking at heaven down there on Earth. And by the way, if you go farther away, then Earth shrinks down to a ball. And there it is, just adrift in space. The darkness of space, with no hint that help is going to come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves, to quote Carl Sagan in The Pale Blue Dot. And so those are true cosmic perspectives, where Earth is not the color-coded schoolroom globe we all grew up with. Why did they do that? Oh, I know why. It's so you can see immediately who your friends and who your enemies are. We're trained in this from early on, the geopolitics of Earth's surface, depending on which side of a line in the sand you happen to be born on. And you look at that from space, you see it as nature intended, with oceans and land and clouds. You are changed when you see the Earth that way and you come back. That's why you don't have legions of astrophysicists leading armies into battle. This is not scientists are some of the most cooperative people there ever were internationally.
You also don't have legions of comedy writers leading armies, but I think that may be a different issue. Well, this touches on something that I've thought about a lot, and and which I've loved in all of your work and all of the work of people who have tried to sort of correct the flaw in our education system that doesn't present science is often presented to school children in a finished state. We did this, it happened, we know this. The antibiotics were invented, and the roundness of Earth was discovered, and science is done. And by failing to convey the living nature of science, probably, I would argue, of all the disciplines, the most alive, the most alive. I don't, I'm sure there are new discoveries being made in economics, but none of them are like the discoveries being made in science. And by not being willing to have that scientific point of view, people often say, if you look at the world scientifically, you're missing the beauty and the glory of God's creation and all of that. And I've always felt, oh, no, that's how you see it.
Yeah, it's added to it. Yeah. In fact, if you're of a kind of religious bend where you the discoveries of science are the manifestations of God's handiwork, then all the more power to you for being motivated to discover science in that way. What tends to happen in certain religious branches is they won't recognize that maybe science found something that conflicts with your holy book. Now what do you do? And Galileo famously said, well, he said a bunch of things, but one of them was, the Bible tells you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. Okay, that's one of my favorites of his. Can't beat that one. That's an early rap star, actually. You could see that on a dance floor. But another one was, why would God give us this level of intellect and expect us to not use it? And so I'm paraphrasing there, but so there are people who'll say the Bible has all I need to know, and the mysteries are just mysteries, and I'll go on with life. Well, you don't tend to make a good scientist if that's how you think about the world. And getting back to being in school and learning about science, yeah, there's some aspects of science that are satchels of facts. Yes, those are the bold-faced words in the chapter that you memorize for the exam. But that should only be a portion of what science is and how it's taught. How it's taught in school. You have to learn about it as like you said, as a living means of querying nature. It's a method to discover what is true, even if you don't think it is, and to discover what is not true, even if you think it is, right? So that's, I just summarized in those two phrases all of the scientific method. Do whatever it takes to not fool yourself into thinking that something is true that is not, or that something is not true that is. And you know what that means? Try to minimize how much you use your own biological senses, because they are, we're happy with them because that's all we've got. But science didn't come of age until we could replace our senses with stuff way more accurate and more precise than just people saying, I saw it. This is how it happened. It must be that way. We've all enjoyed, what do you call optical illusion, books on optical illusions. Okay, they're fun, but you know what they should be called? Brain failures. That's what we should title all of those books. It's a simple line drawing. Oh, is it in the page or out of the page? Is the line longer or shorter? I don't know. Oh my gosh. Brain failures. The fact that those exist at all should make us think twice, 3 times, 4 times about ever trusting eyewitness testimony. And in the chapter on risk, on law and order, there's a whole chapter, law and order. Oh my gosh. And I retell my 3 attempts to serve jury duty, and those ended badly. Okay.
And I will say, Neil, first of all, that was absolutely one of my favorite parts of the book. I recommend, it's 3 stories about wanting to be on jury duty that you should skip to and read and then go back to the beginning.
Okay.
because they are the author being most self-aware of the nature of the author in those particular stories where you are. And by the way, I must say I relate to those because I was on hiatus. I was called to jury duty. I wanted to serve on the jury. I thought it would be an entertaining week. It was voir dire, and the defense attorney asked me, raising the issue of presumption in a trial, he said, if I were to ask you to vote right now on whether or not my client were guilty or innocent, how would you vote? And I said, I think the counselor means guilty or not guilty. Innocence is a religious, not a legal concept. And there was a conference and the court thanks and excuses juror number 10. But I saw you make the same comment, offering a third category of verdict in the book. Let me
yeah, the third cat, just to be clear, so there's guilty, not guilty, and we should have a third category called innocent, right? So guilty is we found evidence that against you that you did this. Not guilty is, we think you did it, but we don't have enough evidence, so we'll let you go. Innocent means we have really good evidence that you didn't do it, and so walk free. So I think we need that category there.
Well, it may make some trial endings more satisfying. Let me ask you this question. So after all of this, because, and again, I will once again commend you on your desire to educate rather than berate, as my instincts are opposite. But with all of the, for lack of a better word, frustration, with the inability of people to look at the world in through a scientific lens, what makes you hopeful that this isn't our permanent lot, that we have the ability culturally to what keeps you from just giving up? Because as an educator, you don't, and so what makes you optimistic?
I think the system at some level is self-correcting. So wealthy people tend to have more than one home, and occasionally that second home is on a beachfront. If you are wealthy and you protect your money and you think the Green New Deal or any variant of it is bad and it's not good for the economy or whatever, plus you don't believe in global warming anyway, and then your beach house floats away in the next storm, that's self-correcting, because it's like, oh my gosh, maybe the scientists are correct, that this doom and gloom is not just scientists banding together to try to exploit the system. By the way, we're not organized enough to even accomplish that, even if we wanted. All right, we're too diverse as in our worldviews going into a problem to believe that we'll just somehow conspire to do anything coherently. So these tend to be self-correcting. We hope that the self-correction doesn't happen too late and plunge us into some future that we've been warned about by science fiction writers. So I had a couple of brief encounters with Ray Bradbury, of course, when he was alive. I don't want to say before he died, because that would imply I might have had an encounter with him while he was dead. And so let me just be very clear. He was alive and well when I had these brief encounters with him. And we were talking about the future of the world. And he said, someone once came up to him and said, Mr. Bradbury, why do you depict these apocalyptic futures for humanity? Is this where you think we're headed? And he said, no, I don't write these futures because that's where I think we're headed. I write these futures so that you will know to avoid them. So your people, your Hollywood people, are really good at taking a little bit of science fact and taking it to some extreme limit that is not in the best interest of civilization. And so maybe you guys are playing an important role there. I mean, not less so the TV people than the full up, blockbuster $200 million movie people. But it remains true that every disaster movie begins with a scientist being ignored by someone in power for what troubles await. And I saw that on a poster that was held up during the Science March of, was it early 2021, was it?
I remember.
And one of the posters said, you should be really worried if scientists and geeks have to go on March. That really should not happen. All right.
Yeah.
If Congress is going to fight about something, let it be not about the objective truths, but about what might be a political nuance or variant on how you might address the political truths. You don't argue about whether or not humans are warming Earth. You accept that, go in the back room. Are there carbon credits? Do we subsidize? Do we not? Those have political solutions? Go right ahead. Have the political conversations.
Well, that goes back to your statement that that should not be controversial. Your statement that some things are true. I will tell you one thing that is true is that it is always terrific to see you, and I've had just a marvelous time talking to you about all of these things. I will say, if you don't have this book yet, I'm going to personally encourage you to pick up a copy. It's different. Although Neil says this is his most scientific, he argues it's his most scientific book. I think that this book is incredibly satisfying because it, look, I love a book that will explain the history of time to me. I'm fascinated by that. But this book, because it connects that scientific concept with the world that we live in on a human and a social level, I have to say I found it absolutely terrific. So this is my strongest recommendation. And if you pick up a copy, and it's not autographed by Neil, it's because you bought it in an airport bookstore in Los Angeles, where it was shipped by mistake, because apparently they don't have a science section. I think our plan here, if I understand the technology, is I am now going to throw this to Ted, and then somehow through some magic mystical system that just baffles me.
Yeah, it's called science, but go on. Yeah,
It's science. I did not know that. You're apparently going to have the opportunity, Neil, to answer some questions from the audience. So this is where I get to say goodbye to you, and I get to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about just a really terrific book and some wonderful things.
So Bill, thanks for your interest, and thanks for your overall time-honored support of science through your work and your enthusiasm for it. So I just want to say the world is different because you're in it. Oh, and by the way, if we're going to end on something, my personal jury is still out on this.
Yes.
Okay. But if you type into a Google search, The Big Bang Theory, your freaking show shows up before the origin of the universe. Okay.
Well, we had,
is that a good thing? I don't know.
I will,
because it made it current, it made it a popular phrase. But still, I just want you to know you have usurped the origin of the universe in a Google search.
We had a bigger marketing department than the universe. That may be the explanation. Neil deGrasse Tyson, thank you so much. I'm going to throw it now over to Ted.
You got it.
Thank you very much, Bill. Terrific conversation. And now we'll take some audience questions. Thanks, Neil, for spending a little more time with us to do this. And thanks to all of you who sent in questions. First one, what was the moment early in your life when you decided science was your thing?
Oh, that was a very clear and present. It was an instant in time. I grew up in New York City, where there's no relationship with the night sky. No one thinks about it. You don't look there. Even if you did, there's a building in the way, or there's light pollution. And back then there was much more air pollution. So you kind of knew the sun was up there. Sometimes you occasionally noticed the moon, but that was about it. And at age 9, we went on a first family visit to our local planetarium, the Hayden Planetarium. And there I sat in the chair and the lights dimmed and the stars came out. And it was more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. So I was certain it was some kind of a hoax or at least a fun educational exercise. And I would later learn that, of course, the actual sky looks like that. And quite embarrassingly, actually, I go to the finest observing facilities on mountaintops, and I look up at the crystalline night sky, and I think to myself, hey, that reminds me of the Hayden Planetarium. It's a very, I don't know if that's a sad comment on what it is to grow up in a city, but it was nonetheless how I feel. And ever since then, I think the universe called me. It was the immensity of the cosmos, how much we didn't yet know about the cosmos. You know, there are many people who have to go through life with sort of some sense of certainty about knowledge and information and awareness. And for me, it was the uncertainty that attracted me. And if I quote the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, and one of his poems has the line, we have to learn to love the questions themselves. And for me, that was a very early revelation.
The good follow-up question is someone else who asked, did your parents have any particular influence on you getting into science or encouraging science?
So that's an excellent question. My parents, neither of them are scientists. My father studied sociology in school, would ultimately work for Mayor Lindsay in New York City during some of the most turbulent years of the civil rights movement. And my mother would later, after we were empty nest, go back to school and get a degree in gerontology, the study of old people and their needs. And so, and here's their like astrophysicist kid where their feet are firmly anchored in the plight of the human condition, and there I am floating away. They, for me, my brother and my sister, in retrospect, this was a highly choreographed, planned conduct of theirs. They would take us around to different cultural institutions every weekend or every other weekend, it felt like. And, you know, the art museum, the aquarium, sporting events, the ballet, orchestra, things that adults do who have talent in other categories than just the doctor, lawyer, you know, categories. And this exposure enabled us to formulate our own interests without any kind of forcing. And so, no, yes, they took me to the Hayden Planetarium. And so that was some foresight there, but they took me to 100 other places. It happened to be the planetarium that attracted me. And upon noticing that in me, then they supported it. They nurtured it. So they bought my first telescope. I think it was $50 from Sears for my 12th birthday. And there, I would rapidly outgrow that. I would earn my own money walking other people's dogs, 50 cents per dog per walk. That was the glory days of dog walking, where you didn't have to clean up after them. Okay. So, you know, I walked 7 dogs at once. But from that money, I'm an early teenager at this point. I bought my first real good, quote, backyard telescope. But of course, I would use it on the rooftop of my apartment, and a camera and photography equipment. And so that, so their support of my interest ensured that I wasn't somehow fulfilling their dreams or following through on their expectations. And that meant for me, not only at the time, but definitely in retrospect, that my interests were homegrown within me. They were genuine. And the moment you start living other people's dreams, it can work, but I don't know if your heart can be in it as much as it otherwise could be if you found that interest all on your own.
What kind of music is your favorite music? And do you ever look up to the skies and think of the cosmos musically?
Actually, I do all the time, all the time. Let me start with the music of the sky. So I confess to being heavily influenced by pop culture, pop media. And, you know, was I 10 years old? That's how old I am. 10 years old when I first saw 2001: A Space Odyssey. And There's a lot of classical music as well as some very modern music that form the soundtrack of that. But it was obvious to me that if I'm going to dock with a space station in orbit, I'm going to be hearing Strauss's Blue Danube. I'm going to hear a waltz. I'm going to hear, so I think there's some music that kind of belongs in space. And am I deferring to the thinking of others who decided that for me? Probably. But when I look up into space, I think of the clever sound designers and engineers and directors who thought about that before I did, and maybe even more deeply than I did in conducting in putting together the films for pop consumption. Oh, by the way, in Guardians of the Galaxy, there's a 1970s, 80s soundtrack of pop music while they're jetting around among the stars. That was kind of fun too, but that's more if you're going to get back inside your head, right? Rather than gaze into the vast emptiness. So that serves a different role. As for my own favorite music, I'm very broad in my musical genres. One I find myself returning to often is classic rock. It somehow it has interesting staying power. You can listen to Hendrix today, 55 years later than when he performed it. Whereas in the 1960s, are you really listening to music 55 years before that? Really? No, I don't think so. So there's something about it that I admire, and its ability to stick with us, not only with its messaging, but in your capacity to appreciate the sounds that it represented. I would say my single favorite genre, however, is the blues. I would be driving down the street, and back in the days when there was a radio station, I'd be turning the radio, and if there's a blues song on, I'd have to like slow down, slide over to the right-hand lane, and just cruise slowly and just absorb the emotions that spill out of the guitar, the voice, the circumstances described in the song. I would later learn that when you have your Mississippi blues and the Chicago blues and the Delta blues, all of this, okay. I would later, after spending time in Texas, I would hear some country western blues. It was like, oh my gosh, what to talk about? That was some low points that people are singing about. And so then I realized, well, why do I enjoy hearing low points? And then I realized that it reminds you of the full dynamic range of what it is to be human. Yeah, is everything clear sky, clear blue skies and sunshine? You could listen to happy music your whole life. You could, but you wouldn't be sampling what emotions you're capable of experiencing. I remember my parents, who are fans of the theater, they had the famous pair of I don't know, it probably has an official word that describes them, the smiling face and the sad face that you typically see associated with theater. And I always looked at that and I said to myself as a young child, I said, why would you ever want to be sad? Why celebrate being sad? What does that even mean? And only with a much more mature outlook would I recognize that on the occasions when you feel sad, they ensure that you most definitely appreciate the times you are not. And it's the juxtaposition of these two that completes the experience of what it is to be human. And so the blues is a very top genre of mine. Also, disco. I came of age. Yes, I own disco pants. All right, so I can listen to disco for days, and especially the classic disco from the 1970s. Also, hip hop. I'm not as deep into hip hop as so many of my contemporaries, but occasionally one bubbles up, and I say, "Yeah, I'm totally resonating with that one." But I wouldn't say that the entire genre resonates with me. Just a selected few that somehow talk to me more than others do. And definitely classical music. And I would have to mature into a state where I would embrace choral music. I remembered when I first heard choral music, I said, why are they screaming at me? Just let me hear the pure notes of the piano, the violin, the oboe, and just shut up already, okay? With the trilling of a soprano, what are you doing? And I would later realize that, and maybe the composers knew this, I would realize, and I learned this from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, where his fourth movement has a choral part, the first symphony to have choral. And I'm thinking, well, what happened there? Why don't the other three movements do it? And why didn't anybody do it before him? And then I realized there comes a time where a musical instrument, as beautiful as they are, does not actually capture what emotion you're feeling. And nothing captures that as sharply as, that's the wrong word, nothing captures it as fully as the emoted voice of someone singing. And so I realize now that pure instruments are an incomplete acoustic experience. I want to hear other human beings in it. And I don't know if you know that Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, commonly played on July 4th, there's a version of that, I think it's the original, where there's a choral part at the beginning and at the end. And once you hear the choral part, you don't go back. Oh my gosh, when the bells are ringing and the human voice rises up above the orchestra, oh my gosh, you're practically in tears every time. So, sorry, that's my long answer to your very simple
No, that's
question.
great. Actually, I have a follow-up question to that. We had a couple of chefs on here in the last few years, and we asked them the question, take music and bring it into the kitchen, and what part of ingredients relate to different kind, what on your ingredient table feels like percussion or the horn or the piano. So I want to do the same thing with you. This is an interesting, fun exercise. You look up into the skies, like what's the Big Dipper, or what is a sunset, or what do the planets say? Any particular music call out to you when you look at some of them?
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm not that. What's the word? Synesthesia, where you have crossed sensory experiences. Like you'd smell something and then see colors, or see colors and then feel. I'm not that cross-wired. When I see the Big Dipper, I embrace it. I know the Big Dipper is actually a gathering of stars that all know about each other's existence in space. Many juxtapositions of stars are very distant from each other, front to back. They just line up together and we think there's some meaning to it, but of course there's not. But so I see them as stars, and I think about whether they might have planets and life. And so my thoughts are more, dare I say, mundane. I'm thinking about the universe. They're cosmically mundane rather than culturally rich. So I don't know that I have a fancy, intriguing reply to that question, but it's a great question.
Next question, Neil, what does beauty mean to you?
Yeah, in my recent book, I spent a whole chapter on truth and beauty. And, philosophers have tackled this forever, and I don't want to claim to have thought about it as much or as deeply as they have. However, I've done a lot of thinking about it. So, for example, let's look at Bible posters that typically juxtapose a quote from some holy text. And I'm speaking more in the West, so it would be the Old New Testament, the Torah, and the Christian Bible. Typically, you will find a Bible quote juxtaposed with a sunset, a beautiful horizon, the sun, there's some clouds and beams of sunlight. You'll find pictures of mountains, waterfalls. I've never seen a picture of the underbelly of a tarantula juxtaposed with a Bible quote. I've never seen images of cancerous cells overrunning a body with a Bible quote. Even though they're all part of, how we say, God's green earth. All of this is happening. Do I see the teeth of a lion ripping into the neck of an antelope as part of? No. We are already pre-sifting things around us and declaring that they are beautiful. Consider that so many representations of deity are described and talked about and thought about on mountaintops. Is it because it's closer to the heavens, or because they're beautiful, or some combination of both? Mount Olympus, it's a mountain. It wasn't Valley Olympus. Okay, the gods weren't down in the trenches. They were up on a mountain. Any representation of a monotheistic God is up in the clouds. Go to Sistine Chapel. God is not in a cave. He's up in the clouds, right? And so there's something about mountains. Moses went to a mountain to get the 10 commandments, or 15 commandments if you're into movie history. And he didn't go to a valley. He didn't go to a cave. Jesus's Sermon on the Mount was not Sermon in the Valley, right? So some things recur. And so I'd like to say that in nature, we cherry pick what is beautiful, and generally we all agree. Is it pleasing to the eye? Is it something that won't harm you? An animal with fangs can harm you. So there's got to be something deep within our DNA that recognizes that's bad. A tarantula is bad. Things that scare you, how are you going to think they're beautiful unless you professionally study them? Yes, an arachnologist, is that what they're called, would delight in an image of the underbelly of a tarantula, probably. But the rest of us, not so much. In addition, just in science, there are some things that are recurring and just make you take pause and say, wow, like pi, the value of pi. It's what's called a transcendental number. You've heard of it, and you've seen 3.1415926. The numbers continue and say, what's so special about pi? And you realize if you measure the circumference of a circle and then measure the diameter and divide those two numbers, you get pi. Not only that, you get pi no matter how big or small you drew that circle. It is a natural ratio in the universe, and it is beautiful. So there are things in the universe that recur and show up and give us insights into a diverse range of objects, phenomena, and ideas. And I have an urge, and I'm not alone in that effort, to call those things beautiful. So with regard to human beauty, this is a learned thing, and it's changed over the years. And I don't know that there's anything fundamental to it. But there's certainly a huge beauty industrial complex that has somehow convinced us all that we are hopelessly ugly unless we get surgery, hair products, makeup. And I joke that aliens coming here, upon seeing what we do every morning to change how we look, from what we look like when we wake up to what we look like when we walk out the front door, they'll see that and say, oh my gosh, humans have the lowest self-esteem of any species in the universe. If the annual revenue of the beauty industrial complex is any indication. Anyway, all that's in the chapter on truth and beauty.
Next question. Someone says, returning from Thanksgiving is maybe a great time to ask this question. What's your best advice for keeping the sanity among family and friends, and agreeably disagreeing when necessary?
Yeah, what you want to, if you're going to disagree on something, let it be on a topic that deserves to have authentic opinions applied to it. The problem is when people disagree on things where there are objectively true facts that will tell you that your point of view is either misformed, malformed, or should have never been formed in the first place. That's the difference. And so much, well, that's one part of it. Another part is, do we have to train people from school age to behave this way? It'd be nice if more people behave like scientists in the following way. I don't want everybody to be a scientist. I want artists and folks who shake up the world. So I'm talking about, here's a way two scientists think. I confront another scientist, and I think something is true, and the other scientist thinks something else is true. By the way, that will only happen on the frontier of discovery. We're not debating whether E equals MC cubed, okay? It's E equals MC squared. We're done. We're on to the next problem. So in my conversation, either we have a pact, unwritten, but it's understood. Either I'm right and you're wrong, you're right and I'm wrong, or we're both wrong. We know that in advance going into the conversation. And because you know you might be wrong, you have to be open to what the other person is saying. If you are certain you are not wrong, just move to an island where everyone else agrees exactly with you, with all of your views. And by the way, that's not this country, I don't think. This is a pluralistic country. People invited from all around the world over the immigration eras. And what an experiment that was, that still is, that we can all get along. And so if you want this is the climate of modern social media. If you post an opinion, people attack it. They don't say, oh, that's interesting. Here's my opinion. Let's see where we agree and where we differ. No, that's not what happens. You get attacked. And I'm thinking to myself, that person wants everyone else to think exactly the way they do. Well, is that the kind of society you want? We have a word that they're called dictatorships. Everybody thinks the same way. Is that what you want? I don't think so. So what do you do in the holiday dinner? Yeah, first read the book first, which will help you navigate conversations during holiday dinners with crazy family members. But I think at the bottom of this is, as an educator, you don't beat people over the head. You explore the foundations of why they think they do what they do. And then you bring in your ideas for why you think the way they, and so you just have that conversation, contest it. I think that's fine. That's a very healthy posture. Try not to do it on things that are objectively true or objectively false, because then you're wasting everybody's time.
A couple more questions. Here's a fun one. Do you ever get consulted about scenes in movies or television shows that involve science, and they want your expertise to see if I suppose, however it's going to be displayed, is believable or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, but less often than you might think. So let me just put this in context. I give public lectures across the country on many different subjects. The subject, in fact, is chosen by the host theater where I give a public talk. And I give them the option of 15 talks I can do. One, search for life in the universe, a cosmic perspective, astronomy bizarre, cosmic collisions. There's a lot of fun topics. Well, one of them is titled "An Astrophysicist Goes to the Movies." And that was so popular, and I have so much material that it spawned another one called "An Astrophysicist Goes to the Movies," the sequel. And so in it, I show dozens of clips from films and comment on them, not just science fiction films, quote, regular films that happen to have either good or abominable science in them. For example, A Bug's Life, the Pixar anime, I think it's Pixar, has remarkable science in it. And the abominable science is the ants are walking bipedally and they only have 4 appendages. And so, no, ants don't do that. But there's some remarkable physics portrayed in A Bug's Life. Point is, it's a fun thing. And I think what put me on the map about this was when I criticized Titanic back whenever that came out, 1997 or 98. Titanic, this sinking scene where Kate Winslet is on the plank after she dumps her frozen boyfriend into the North Atlantic, and she's looking up at the night sky. We know the longitude, the latitude, the day, the date, the time. That we know the weather conditions. There was no clouds. There was no moon. There's only one sky she should have been looking at, and it was the wrong sky. It was not only the wrong sky, one half of the sky was a mirror reflection of the other half. It was not even wrong. I was a lazy guy. So I wrote all these letters to Jim Cameron. I got no reply. Then as I got more visible and I had some intersecting points with him, I raised it with him and still no reply. Eventually I got a phone call. This is like years later. I get, is this Tyson? I said, yes. So I worked with James Cameron. He is producing a centennial director's cut IMAX of the film. He's recutting some scenes, and he says you have a sky he could use. And I said, oh, yes, Jim Cameron comes through. I've later become friends with him, and he's a very big fan of science and technology and engineering, as evidenced in the films that he's produced, which have groundbreaking visual effects. And point is, I got, that was all in all the newspapers and things. So you would think I'd be like the top list of anybody's that want to get their science right advisors. The difference is you don't need me for that. We can get a graduate student to advise on a film, all right? And they delight in this because my body of knowledge that'll help your film is the same as the body of knowledge carried by a graduate student. I had my body of knowledge for this in high school, even. I remember the Disney film, The Black Hole. One of the 10 worst films I've ever seen. That film came out, when was it? Late 70s, early 80s. And I knew enough about black holes. I say these people did no homework on this at all. I was like 17, 18. How was this? Whenever that came out. I was just going to college. I knew enough. I could have totally tricked out that film. All right. But they didn't call me. So the point is, I could be on more films. I don't need to be. Happy to spread that love. And by the way, films I think have gotten more scientifically accurate over the years. And my reasoning for that is, well, I'm on that landscape, that force operating. I don't think I'm the biggest force. You know what I think is? Comic-Con. The fans of Comic-Con. They're all scientifically literate. They love science fiction. They love storytelling, and they will call you out if your constellations aren't right. You didn't portray that some form of part of the galaxy as well as you could have. People talk about you in social media and elsewhere. So it puts producers and writers on the spot. And I think it's for the better. It enriches the cinematic experience.
And our final question, Neil, a lady asks, a lot of resources are spent with the idea that we're going to get to Mars and trying to figure out if life can exist on Mars. It's my opinion, she says, that that's an awful lot of money that perhaps could be spent trying to solve other problems. Your thoughts?
Okay. So here's a beautiful example of what I would call an underinformed opinion. Okay. So this is someone who has strong feelings, obviously, and she's not alone. Many people say and think this. Okay. So what I spend most of the book doing is trying to offer insights into your own opinion. I don't want to hand you an opinion. There wouldn't be an opinion at that point, but I want to make sure that if you have an opinion, it's as informed as it possibly could be. Okay. So let's start. How much money does she think NASA is spending in space as a fraction of our total annual budget as a country? Because it's a federal program, of course. So there's a fraction that is represented in those numbers. How much does she think? 9 out of 10 times I ask people, they vastly overestimate what percentage of the federal budget it is. Vastly, by factors of 10. I've heard people say, is it 5%? Is it 10%? No, it is 1/2 of 1%. So you hold up your tax dollar, it's a half a penny on it. So that statement, that opinion is saying that 0.5% is too much money. We need to put that to other things to help us here on Earth. But I do not hear her talking about the other 99.5% of the budget. Has she looked at where else we are spending money? Way more money than on NASA. So why aren't you going to these? Do you realize that the defense budget, the defense budget in recent years up around $700 billion? Okay. Do you realize that rivals the entire 60 years of NASA's budget that has ever been spent? A single year of defense spending. So yes, we want to be secure and we want to be safe, but I'm asking, is there something in the Defense Department budget that she could look at? I don't really think we need that. I want to spend that money on schools and that money on, okay? So I just want to put that in context. There's a whole other rest of the budget that I don't hear her talking about. That's A. B, let's go back 30,000 years. We're in the cave. She's a cave elder. And I'm one of the, kids, young cave kids. And we're all in the cave. And I peer out the cave door. And I look out. If the caves had doors, I don't know. Imagine a hinged rock door, like the Flintstones had hinges on their doors. Yeah, I open the door and I look out and I see, wow, there's a stream and a mountain and trees and fruit on the tree. I wouldn't have words for them because I've actually never been outside the cave door. And I go back to the cave elders, this person who poses this question, and I say, my friends and I want to go out and explore what's outside the cave door. And the elder says, nope, we have problems in the cave that we have to solve first. We don't have the luxury to leave the cave. Solve the cave problems first, then we'll let you explore. That's what she sounds like to me. That's what she sounds like. You're saying we're on this speck, this third rock from the sun, and we have this vast universe of unlimited resources. And you're saying, let's stay on Earth and solve its problems first, without embracing all the rest of what the universe can, has, and will continue to offer. 24/7 source of energy. Rare earth elements on Earth are common on asteroids, by the way. Okay? If we discover life somewhere else and we learn something deep about how life works, and you're going to say, no, stay on Earth. All I can tell you is that the history of scientific exploration at any given time always looks like it's irrelevant. Always. In the 1920s, we're on the centennial anniversary of the discovery of quantum physics. That happened in the 1920s. The most brilliant minds in the world are studying the behavior of atoms and molecules. You can't even see atoms and molecules. Why are you wasting this brilliance? Do you realize that in 1897, J.J. Thomson discovered the electron? You know what he said about it? May it never be of any use to anybody. Okay. It was a subatomic particle that nobody is even thinking has any value. And it's the complete foundation of our electricity. And quantum physics, there is no creation, storage, and retrieval of digital information without exploiting the principles of quantum physics, which were laid down to paper in the 1920s. Yeah, it would take 50 years to turn that into computers and digital compute. Yeah, it would take time. But if you were around back then, would you say you're too smart to spend your time in this? Go figure out how to, feed the homeless. Or, by the way, there've been homeless people since Jesus. Okay, so to say if you stopped NASA, we'll solve those problems. It's not clear to me that you have the causes and effects in the right place. So sorry, that's my long reply to that comment.
Let's just do one final question. Here's a
Flip
fun
it in
one.
there. Go ahead.
It says, if you were to stop your career right now, celebrate everything you've done, look at all your books on your bookshelf, and instead went to become something else, what might that be? A musician?
Oh, yeah, no, I know exactly. So I can't stop my career because I don't have talent in anything else. So, but if I imagine a parallel universe version of me that actually has the talent that I would need to do what I want to do, I would be a songwriter for Broadway musicals. That's what I would be. What are they called? Librettists? What are they called? There's some word for them. And I love, yeah, I think I could write the words to a song, but I can't write music. I can't read music. I can sort of read it, like, because I was in an elementary school play, right? Not because I have deeply follow the scribbles in front of me on a page of music that other people read and are completely fluent in. So I love simple words put to a sentence that communicate information, emotion, can advance a story. And at a limit, as I said earlier about the human voice, you might feel it so deeply that you have to sing it. And let me be honest. When I was a kid, I did not appreciate the human voice. I thought it muddied the purity of instruments. I'd be seeing a Broadway play and two people be walking up to each other, and it's okay, I feel a song coming on. Okay, bum, bada bing. They start singing for 4 minutes, and I'm thinking, can you just advance the plot, please? Again, in my later years, where I began to appreciate what it is to be human, I began to see, think, feel, and appreciate the role that the human voice plays, and the next notch emotion that it can bring to simple words on a page. So I would write words on a page to be sung by performers on stage. And here's a sentence, one of my favorite sentences that I've composed, all right, just to put it out there as an example. Spinning planets orbit their host stars along their appointed paths, like pirouetting dancers in a cosmic ballet, choreographed by the forces of gravity.
Coming next to Broadway.
No, that's that would be that. What would we call that? That would be a cosmic ballet, right?
Well, thanks a lot, Neil. I really appreciate your time. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions. Thanks again.
Yeah,
to
I'm
Bill
sorry
Prady.
I took so long to answer. We didn't get to as many questions as possibly we could have, but I hope my long answers still people could embrace what they are and what they mean to you.
And thanks to
What
Bill
they mean to
Prady
me.
for taking the time to chat early in the event. Neil's book again is Starry Messenger: Cosmic Perspectives on Civilization. Signed copies are available for purchase in the link below and in the comment section. As we like to say around here, please go on gently. Take care.
As I like to say, keep looking up.